Okay. I hope you don't mind. I'm going to record the class so that I can post it on YouTube and you can all watch it later. If you mind, please let me know so that we can see what we can do about that. All right. So I'm now recording. Let's now start. You've seen, I'm sure some of you or most of you would have watched the 3-minute video that I also put on the, can you still see the screen? I'm sharing the screen. Can you see it?
Yes, sir.
All right. Okay. So let's progress. So generally, this is the course outline, what I will try to cover over the next few weeks during our interaction. Some of them will come up as assignments for you. Some of them will be asked to go and read up, but we'll see how far we can go. But the aim is to not go back and begin to look at the basics, but to apply the knowledge in agroforestry to our current situation, to situations around the world, and to see how beneficial or how negative agroforestry is to the people across the continent. So today we'll look at some definitions of agroforestry, and then we'll also look at the history and concept of agroforestry. We may touch up on structural or on classification systems. Then probably in the next class, we'll look at the types of agroforestry systems and practices that we have, and we'll go on like that. So in the way of definition, agroforestry can be said to be a sustainable land management system with the ultimate aim to increase yield on land, combine tree crops and arable crops, and sometimes animals simultaneously or concurrently in a sequential, or sequentially on the same land, where you apply some management practices that most of the time should be compatible with the practices of the local communities where you are working. And ultimately, agroforestry aims to conserve the soil, to improve soil conservation. And it also aims to improve the yield of both wood and food on the land, and sometimes also to help either rehabilitate land or conserve biodiversity on the land where you are working. And generally, in the tropical environment, your aim should not ultimately be just to achieve maximum productivity. Why? Partly because the land is nutrient poor, partly because the soil structure is weak. Most times the soil is acidic, and when you expose the land, particularly soils in tropical environments, for too long, you begin to have degradation. So that is how the concept of agroforestry came up, because no convenient markets for food surplus. That's another problem. You discover that many agricultural farms have experienced the risk of crop failure, either due to pest outbreak, disease outbreak. Sometimes when there's a glut in the market, farmers produce maize. For example, during the peak maize season, you have maize everywhere. Maize is very cheap, and farmers cannot sometimes make what do you call it, a return on their crop products from their farms. So that's one of the reasons why traditional farming systems need to be integrated. If you go to most traditional farms, you find out that you have an integrated system where farmers don't just depend on one crop, but they have multiple crops that they have on their farm, and these crops, from the tree crops to the arable crops that they change from time to time, can supply their needs all through the growing season and the non-growing season. And also, they also integrate animals. So you have chicken, you have livestock like goats, ram, all on the farm. providing both goods and also services for farmers. And trees have always been part of our human survival as human beings. I mean, when you look at historical facts from the Neolithic man, the wanderer, the gatherer of fruit. So, you know, when you look at evolutionary explanations about how life evolved, they will tell you that man moved from being a wanderer to being a gatherer of fruits to being sheltered by trees, where they then began to have settlements and started living sedentary lives. Trees have always been part of our existence, providing medicinal plants, providing, even before the advent of clothes, they used tree products for covering their body. You remember, for example, even in the Garden of Eden, when Adam and Eve, after they had sinned, what did they do? They used leaves to cover themselves. So trees, those leaves probably came from trees. And when they started living sedentary lives, they had to move into shifting cultivation, because when you cultivate a piece of land for a particular period of time, after some time, productivity will drop on that land, and you have to move to another land. But with increase with civilization, increase in population, we then have this increase in pollution. We have water bodies becoming silted because man will go clear the watershed, cut the trees there to build their houses, and then you have erosion pushing all the debris from land into water and causing eutrophication in the soil. So you have vagaries of environmental problems that have evolved as man has developed and urbanization has taken shape. I hope you can all hear me.
Yes, sir, we can.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
All right. Sorry about that. Let me share the screen again. Why is Farhana just joining us? We are late.
I have network issues, sir. That is why I'm sorry, sir.
So let's proceed. So, and over time, over history, we've had issues such as declining land use capability, issues with site facility. I just mentioned human population. For example, population in Nigeria is supposed to become around 400 million by 2050. That's if all the insecurity don't disintegrate the country, which I pray they won't. We have continuous need for infrastructural development, because the people that are being born, they have to live somewhere. They have to create, you need urbanization, create facilities, hospitals, schools for them. You need to build new roads to access new communities. We also have the problem of global issues such as climate change. And then farmers, particularly in tropics in Nigeria, have a low return on investment a lot of the times, because the soil where they till and they produce their crops is not able to support, to provide profit. You hear some farmers tell you that, oh, I planted cassava, and at the end of the day, my cost of production is higher than my returns. And this tends to discourage people from even want to go into farming. That's where agroforestry comes in, where, like Mr. Ake told us earlier on, you integrate arable crops. So you have arable crops. This is probably yam, animals, and trees all together on the same piece of land. You, as the farmer, are thinking, when you have just an arable farm, your land is exposed. So if it rains, this farm is exposed to erosion, for example. But if you have trees there, so this man is thinking about, oh, I need to introduce trees to protect my land. This is a slopy land, like this one. When you have a tree, the tree protects the soil and protects the arable crop against runoff. So that brought up So agroforestry actually is an old practice with a new name. Let me use that word, because farmers, local farmers, have always known, like my grandfather. I remember when I was young, and we used to go to his farm in Ekiti back in the day, a few decades ago. These people had, my grandfather, for example, had arable crops, vegetables, grow maize, grow cassava, grow yam. And then you had a canopy of trees, of kola nuts, for example. Kola nuts, the very unique orange crop, orange, kola nuts, and cocoa, all mixed with arable crops on the land. Because they believe that intercropping had an advantage over sole cropping in terms of effective use of the natural resources, such as the nutrients from the soil, sunlight, the available space, and the water body. Mr. Sulaimon, please change the name appearing from Techno to your name so that we know who and who is in the class. So it's beneficial to helping control pest and disease problems. The advantages, particularly when you have leguminous trees or plants growing with non-leguminous mixes, such that then helps you enrich your soil. And then eventually you get a higher yield when you mix crops as compared to sole cropping. So there is interaction between you, the farmer, the field crops, the trees, and the animals. And everybody tends to benefit, particularly man. So you have man here, you get your food, you get labor, particularly in the north, you get labor, you get your income. The animal gives you manure. The manure goes into the soil. The trees absorb, arable crops absorb the manure, and then the tree and the arable crops provide fodder, that's food, for the animal. And so you have an iteration of benefits across board for all the parties involved in agroforestry. So this, for example, will be a typical forest in a natural forest in a tropical environment. And you can see, for example, the high level of organic matter that has been deposited on the soil. So in this kind of forest now, if you introduce arable crops, the arable crops will benefit because they then get a lot of nutrients from the organic matter that has been deposited on the soil for many years. So to give you a few definitions, I usually want to use some of the timeless definitions that we have. For example, agroforestry is a dynamic, ecologically based natural resource management system that integrates trees on farms and agricultural landscapes, helps you to diversify and sustain productivity, and eventually you're able to increase the social, the economic, and the environmental benefits accruable from your land. These are other definitions that focus on land, definitions that focus on the components. So, for example, the third one here focuses on having woody perennials on the same land with animals and crops in a spatial mix or temporal sequence. Spatial mix means the way you arrange it on the land area. Temporal system means you change it over time. So you have this particular crop now, you change it to another crop next season. And so there are so many definitions that you can find for agroforestry. The aim is that the definition implies that you must always have a woody perennial for you to call it an agroforestry system. So you must always have trees. And then you can have animals or plants or both combined with it. So you always have at least two or more outputs. Output from the tree, output from the animal, output from the crop. And your cycle would always be more than 1 year. If you have only maize or cassava on your land, your output will be, once you harvest the cassava, that's the end. But on a land where you have animals, you have trees, when you get your output from the cassava, after some time you get an output from maybe your fruit tree, and then the animals can also provide an output for you. So it's a complex ecological and economical structure, which is way, way, way more complex than monocropping systems. So let's quickly watch the video. How many of you have watched the video? Let me find out first. Please, can you raise your hand if you have watched the video? Who has watched the video? Okay, only Mrs. Jaya. Okay, 2 people. All right. So for the benefit of others, let's watch the video again. I hope I can find it. I hope you can hear it.
The term agroforestry is derived from agriculture and forestry and represents a combination of both. Through the integration of trees on farmland, increased social, economic, and environmental benefits are realized. There are 3 main classifications of agroforestry systems. The first, silvo-arable, includes trees with crops. The second, silvopastoral, includes trees with animals. And the third, agro-silvopastoral system, gathers trees, crops, and animals together. In conventional agriculture, removing trees is a common practice. This principally affects hills and valleys, leading to severe erosion. Trees on farmlands can have a variety of positive effects on both crops and animals. As their roots extend much deeper than those of annual crops or pasture, water can more easily infiltrate into the ground, which leads to reduced waterlogging and runoff. As a result, erosion rates are significantly reduced. Trees also take up nutrients in deeper layers that cannot be reached by the crops, and thereby prevent the leakage of fertilizers or manure into the groundwater. The canopies of the trees serve as windbreaks, which lower the evaporation of the surrounding vegetation and act as a shelter for increased animal welfare. The inclusion of trees in agriculture enhances biodiversity and helps with biological pest control by attracting birds that feed on caterpillars, for instance. Trees can diversify a farmer's income sources. They can provide fodder for livestock, food such as fruit and nuts, firewood and timber. In contrast to annual crops, trees in general have a much slower rate of income return. They may take several years before they start paying off. This is a big obstacle, especially for farmers that do not own land, but only rent it. Agricultural policies often discourage farmers from adopting agroforestry systems by not providing any subsidies, while conventional monoculture systems are promoted. Forest regulations might even prohibit the cutting or selling of tree products grown on farmland. Although not as profitable as conventional agriculture at a first glance, agroforestry comes with long-term benefits, such as preserving forests, cleaner waterbeds, healthy biodiversity, and a sustainable and profitable relationship between the farmer and the environment.
All right, I hope you all heard that. So, okay, Miss Obong is raising her hand. Can you hold on for, let me quickly see if I can go through all the slides and then you can ask your question. Just note your questions, we'll discuss them at the end. For adventure, this session ends. I'll open another link and then send it to you. I think I'll use the same username and ID and what do you call it, password. You can just reconnect because we are using the free version. Dr. Lajikwe is not very rich, so you can't get the subscription version, if you don't mind. So let me just continue with where I stopped. And we're talking about classification of agroforestry systems. Now, you can classify a particular agroforestry practice based on either the structure, the function, the ecological spread, or the social economic nature. When you talk in terms of the structure, for example, when you say home gardens, in a home garden, you expect to find arable crops, you find tree species, you could also find animals all together in the home garden. When you say alley farming, for example, you know, okay, alley or alley cropping, you have your arable crops in the alley, and then you have the tree species forming the growing along the edge of your alley. So structurally, we are talking about the spatial arrangement of the tree component, whether in terms of vertical stratification or temporal arrangement in terms of time. You'll see these structural arrangements when we begin to look at the different types of agroforestry practices that we have. When you talk in terms of the function, so when you say a windbreak, you know that the aim of the trees is to serve as a windbreak, or you say shelter belt, or serve as a shelter to protect your arable crops from wind erosion. So it could be for soil conservation. So you're trying to protect the soil, or it could be a productive function where you have woodland or fruit and fodder, like there is what we call protein banks or fodder banks. Protein banks or fodder banks, it's a PD. There is a diagram I always draw for students in the first class. But because of we are not having a physical class, maybe I can snap it and send it to you for you to be able to see the complexities and the different practices that you have in agroforestry. And the list goes on. In terms of the ecological spread, we could be talking in terms of the type of land use over very large landscapes. For example, the type of agroforestry practice you have in the arid region will not be the same as the type you will practice in the lowland rainforest zone or what you will find in the derived savanna zone because of the kind of ecological system, ecological zone that we are talking about. And then when you talk in terms of the socioeconomic nature, when you're classifying it based on the socioeconomic nature, you're talking in terms of the scale of production, whether it's on a small scale or on a large scale, in terms of the technological inputs, whether low or high technological inputs, in terms of the intensity of management, whether at subsistence level, commercial level, or at the intermediate level. So this session will end in 10 minutes. So when it ends, if we have not finished, we can go ahead to take, I'll open another class and then we can all connect again. So let's quickly go into the history of agroforestry. It's an ancient farming system. It has been used since primitive times, like I said. In Europe, you find historically how they have mixed trees and crops. Some have mixed coconut with coffee, tea, shifting cultivation in India. You have live fences. So they use trees to form live fences in America. So I'm not just about America, USA, but on the American continent. You have rice paddies where there are rice paddies with trees growing around the rice paddies in the Philippines. And in Africa, like I said, you have home gardens, you have traditional agroforestry farms or parklands where you have trees serving as barriers for maybe demarcation of land boundaries or where trees are even mixed with arable crops. One major documented historical land milestone in the agroforestry practice is the 1806 Tonja system development in Myanmar by the then current, I think means the head of the forest in this Tarawadi division, where they used farmers to set up teak plantations. And that's where the term Tonja system came from. So, like I said earlier, it's a new name for an old practice, agroforestry. And the aim is to accommodate and sustain the various components in an ecological balance. And it helps in protecting the fragile soils that you have in the tropics, particularly since the turn of the 19th century, when we have had industrial revolution, industrial development, increase in population, and the need for more farms. So forestry has struggled because farmers just look out for forest lands when they are looking for more land to farm. And so forest has always been threatened. So in different parts of the world, agroforestry has always, they have tried to introduce agroforestry as a response to the crisis that exists between farmers and forest lands. So in South Africa, for example, in 1887, they tried to bring in agroforestry as a government-recognized practice. In India, you had the by 1890, they were also trying to integrate agroforestry, Tonja system, and all that in establishment of forest plantations, where they would use landless laborers or unemployed people to come and farm, but they would plant the trees, and then they're allowed to farm until the trees would close canopy, and then they have to move to another land. Now, when we talk in terms of the acceptance of agroforestry, the World Bank at some point in the 1970s had to reassess their development policies in terms of policies related to forestry development and policies related to arable crop production, particularly in the tropics. So also the FAO had to also re-examine their policies, that rather than just clearing land, giving farmers fertilizer and inputs, and encouraging monoculture, can we go back and look at the historical success of intercropping systems? And this was further necessitated by the increasing deteriorating food production situation in many developing countries, coupled with deforestation, ecological degradation, increase in food prices, and shortage of fertilizer across the continent in the 1970s. And so they looked into history and they found Tonja system as a system that had targeted tree crop production, plantation establishment. They looked at how successful it had been in those countries that had tried to introduce it in terms of the limits or little damage to the trees, the improved growth of the trees, as well as the agricultural crops due to competition, the fact that there was optimum time and sequence of planting, where they would synchronize planting with the planting of trees with the crop calendar. And then this would, because the farmer would tend the trees as he tends his crop, they ended up having increased growth and survival of the trees, as well as the crop. And then when the trees matured, they were helping to in soil conservation. And so that led to the establishment of the International Development Research Center. The International Research Development Center, which led to the establishment of the ICRAF, what we call ICRAF, the International Council for Research in Agroforestry. I'm sure some of you would have come across it in your maybe literature search in 1977. And then they were able to institutionalize the practice of agroforestry. It became a science, not just based, it was no longer based on indigenous knowledge, but it became a science. That's why you have what we call, if you go online, you type World Agroforestry, there is a center that is in charge of this. It's an international center. By 1991, the name was changed to the Center for Research in Agroforestry, and the aim was to collect information. Thanks to ICRAF, you have so much information online today. I just posted a material that was published by ICRAF. There's so many documents. There are two materials that I posted, one by Dr. Babalola from Ilorin and another. So you have a lot of textbooks, research funded by ICRAF online, because so they help with dissemination of research results. They pioneer new approaches, provide facts to support the success of agroforestry. So today, we teach agroforestry in universities. That's why you are listening to me wherever you are today, because agroforestry has become a science. And it is always linked even with agricultural training for those in pure agriculture. And we have to understand that it is a land use system that needs to be promoted because of the fact that it can help you conserve your land and also rehabilitate degraded lands. And whether we like it or not, problems such as the demand for land will continue to be with us. For development, we will continue to have issues with deforestation. You know the problem we have with climate change, problems with human population increase, and all these things show us that we need alternatives to subsistence farming. We need alternatives to just shifting cultivation from one place to another. And agroforestry, apart from other alternatives such as organic farming or sustainable climate smart agriculture, is a veritable alternative because, like I said earlier, helps you with soil conservation, accommodates the needs of the farmer, can help you with protecting your soil from erosion, from leaching, and some of the other problems that arise from opening up forest canopies. So you are able to diversify your income, improve sustainability in your productivity. You're also able to maintain biodiversity, as you saw in the video, ameliorate land degradation, water degradation, and eventually contribute to increased timber supply. What are some of the features? I've mentioned them already that you find in any agroforestry practice or system. You have multiple plant components. You have a higher level of interaction, whether economic or biophysical. You have multiple products. I've mentioned that earlier. You have increased service function. So this class will end in a few seconds. So just hold on and then you can reconnect. Hopefully you'll be able to use the same link to reconnect. If that does not work, then I will send another link to you. Let's also hope maybe we'll have an extension from Zoom. So, and then you're able to also optimize the use of the plant residues that you have on the land. So inputs from littered droppings on the land and other